Imagine you fall into a dream. Suddenly you are jolted awake and seem to be in a cave, cold, damp, and dark. Looking up, you see large icicles jutting out of the ceiling, like teeth from the maw of a carnivore. Suddenly, from some unknown separate chamber, emerges a towering, gaunt monstrosity. Its eyes are owl-like. Its fatless frame is taut and muscular. Its head is bloated with matted hair, but is mostly covered in the fleshless skull of a stag. It approaches. You stay put, frozen in fear. In an outstretched palm, it offers what seems to be meat of an unknown origin. Pausing, you stare quizzically into the owl-eyed giant, searching for some kind of an answer to the millions of questions you have. Do you take it? Why would you? It gestures at you again to say,
"Eat it. Don't be shy."
As your fingers grab the morsels presented, you brush the creature's hand. It's as cold as the chamber around you, and you recoil in frostbitten pain. You try for the morsel once again, and manage to take it in your fingers. As you place it in your mouth, you can feel a change, and soon, looking into the reflecting ice wall, you see that you're now a wolf. The conversion is over. You are now a Wendigo, devourer of men, killer of all, and one of the most misunderstood diseases to ever grace indigenous culture. Let's dive into the Wendigo. The term Wendigo, or Wendigo, probably derives from the Algonquin language word for owl. And excuse me, I'm not Algonquin, so I'm probably going to mispronounce this. WeTegowa, and dates back as far as 1636, at least in Eurocentric written history. A French missionary to Quebec, Paul Lejeune, wrote of a cannibal woman who was forced out of her tribe. She had become violent and would lash out at anyone who approached her, saying she was going to kill and eat them all. As the settlers and tribes moved west, so did stories similar to the cannibal woman. In a paper titled Reviving Wendigo, an ethno-history of cannibal monsters in the Athabasca district of northern Alberta, 1878 to 1910, Nathan Carlson for the U of A mentions ancient myths from the Great Lakes region of a giant owl-eyed humanoid with large clawed hands, a massive bloated head covered in matted hair, an emaciated nude body, and a heart made of ice, making them cold to the touch. Typically, the lips are absent, showing a row of gnarled teeth. The legend says that the creatures are so hungry for man flesh, it eventually eats its own body like some sort of anthropophagus. The sight of these creatures was also noted by French soldiers during their colonial conquests of Quebec. Skirmishing lines of local tribes would send forth tête de bol, or ball heads, before regular warriors, playing the role of a berserker and terrifying the enemy. The same tales of these crazed homicidal cannibals can be found in Alberta and Saskatchewan centuries later, but this time they were recorded by modern methods that have been archived. Carlson calls this period between the 19th and 20th centuries the Wendigo trials, comparing them to the Salem witch trials, because of the legal mention of the Wendigo. So many of these cannibal or homicide cases became public that the affliction and myth could be studied, and trends could be noticed. This wasn't just a fake monster from antiquity. This seemed to be an actual disease that could be contracted, or even worse, possibly spread. One of the most descriptive accounts comes from George Nelson, a fur trader working for the HBC fort at Lac La Ronge, Saskatchewan. In an 1823 letter to his family, he recounts tales of local Wendigo and provides information on the condition. George calls it a kind of a disease or distemper of the mind, particularly prevalent in the Cree or Saulteaux people, that causes the victim to fly into a death-dealing rage. Aside from the mythical giants, George seems to think that the Wendigo complex is caused by three major things: starvation, cannibalism, and the most mysterious part, the dream. The prairies turn into a frozen, lifeless tundra in the winter, so starvation would have been a common occurrence if you were misfortunate. Pair this with the near extinction of the buffalo in the 19th century, and you can see why so many people may have gone Wendigo. The starvation aspect is odd, as even when presented with conventional food, the Wendigo will deny it after turning. In cases where there has been no cannibalism, the Wendigo is said to still crave human meat above all other food. Cannibalism is the most recognized part of the Wendigo persona. In the book The Orders of Dreams, George Nelson on Cree and Ojibwa Myth and Religion, 1823, Jennifer Brown and Robert Brightman compiled collections of accounts from both written and oral sources. The majority of anecdotes mention that the cannibalism had occurred at one point in the Wendigo's life, or the thought of cannibalism was so strong that they couldn't contain their normal composure any longer. With the rampant desire for human meat comes the intense homicidal rage. Accounts from Wendigo possession mention that the host will emotionally cycle. Angry, sad, depressive, murderous, normal, happy, laughing, and then back to angry. This emotional instability is usually accompanied by suicidal thoughts. There are at least 3 accounts told where the affected person offered to end themselves before doing more damage. Again, sudden compassion and care is shown from a person hoping to eat you mere minutes later. And then, the most mysterious, the dream. Brown and Brightman collected anecdotes that possibly link the nightmares to the indigenous Canadian practice of fasting and the belief in spirit animals. But with the dark influence of cannibalism and murder, some dreamers spoke of an icebound Wendigo spirit that offers them meat that looks to be of an animal. The dreamer either then takes or refuses the meat. A theme of ice is said to be prevalent, and cold is always associated with the Wendigo evil spirit. If the dreamer takes and eats the meat, it is said that the Wendigo possesses them, which is when the physical and mental transformation begins to take place. These dreams typically come during times of fasting, but have also been said to show up anytime, leading to increased societal anxiety. Any of these 3 things, singular or in combination, can turn one into a Wendigo. With such a random threat plaguing the Algonquin for so many centuries, there was some significant study into how to cure it. A solution has not been found officially, but there are methods that are said to stop the transformation. The first line of defense is to personally recognize the signs. If you have the dream, talk to your local medicine man. George Nelson mentions the use of shaking tents, basically teepees where they practice spiritual exorcisms. The healers would administer remedies in hopes that one would push the Wendigo spirit out. If that didn't work, ostracization was the norm. Claiming to have the dream was almost as taboo as committing cannibalism itself, which is why so many were hesitant to bring it up. The most successful cure found was to melt the iced heart of the Wendigo. Much like that of the mythical form of the frost giant, Wendigo sufferers are said to feel cold to the touch, and when asked how they feel on the inside, a cold feeling in their chest was the typical answer. This led healers to assume the Wendigo's heart was frozen, contributing to their callous behavior. In some cases, laying the afflicted by the fire did the trick. In worse cases, pouring hot animal fat down their throat is said to melt the victim's icy interior. Anyone who's had a deep fryer burn can attest to how painful that would be. But again, the threat was so severe, killing the sufferer was seen as a better outcome. If the shaking and the fat didn't work, or the affliction developed too fast for banishment to be an option, binding and execution was the only solution. The Wendigo would be tied up and watched while they either wasted away or were killed. The guards mention that the victim is usually conscious and will talk to them. The typical emotional cycling was mentioned, along with a joyful, nonchalant offer to end their own life as usual. And if that wasn't disturbing enough, these are traits that are consistent in most execution stories, and even those who may not have the disease. And this is where the Salem witch trial comparisons are very apt. Some of these ostracized people may not have been Wendigos, but rather mentally ill people that someone wanted to get rid of. Perhaps the most famous case of a Wendigo is Swift Runner, or Gasigome. The Northwest Mounted Police contracted Swift Runner outside Fort Saskatchewan around 1875, and he was immediately employed by the force at the suggestions of a Hudson Bay trader. He was a pathfinder for them, and as far as I can tell, did a good job, but unfortunately fell into alcoholism. Despite the whiskey trade being officially snuffed out in the prairies, Swift Runner somehow found a steady stream of the stuff, and became a violent alcoholic who had police protection. Add to this his 6-foot-tall, 200-pound frame, and it was hard to control the cocky drunkard. Eventually, his bad behavior outweighed his great pathfinding skills, and the Northwest Mounted Police cut him loose, sending Swift Runner into a depression and a bout of kleptomania. His first recorded arrest comes in 1876, for nearly shooting another trader during his period of alcohol withdrawal. That gave the police enough grounds to ban him from the fort's limits, and when he returned home, he was likewise ostracized. If you've been paying attention, you'll know that this is prime breeding ground for the Wendigo spirit to manifest itself. Swift Runner made camp near his former band, and soon his family joined him, 9 in all. His brother, wife, mother, and 6 of his children. Then, the worst winter on contemporary records up to that point hit Alberta. From 1878 to 1880, the prairie winters routinely dipped between -40 and -60 Fahrenheit, around -50 Celsius. If you went outside unprepared, you'd freeze in minutes. The group was at the mercy of the weather, and nature isn't known for its clemency. The harsh cold trapped all of them indoors, with an alcoholic fighting withdrawals and cabin fever. And while we don't know exactly the situation that occurred, Swiftrunner states the Wendigo spirit came back to him. When he was younger, he was trapped in a cave during a winter hunting trip. The friend who accompanied him had passed due to the elements, and Swiftrunner had little other options for food. Likewise, the situation in his camp became dire. His children and family started to pass away, and the only solution to the hunger was to eat them. A few members fled but were chased down and killed. The neighboring band reported the atrocities to the Northwest Mounted Police, but their cries fell on deaf ears. It wasn't until a local hunter stumbled upon the human remains that they investigated. And when the investigators arrived at the carnage on October 25, 1879, Swiftrunner was amicable and cooperative. He let them know he was inhabited by the spirit of a Wendigo after the dreams where he became a wolf. The Northwest Mounted Police met with the Cree, and together, these groups sentenced him to hang to death. On a -49-degree morning on December 28, 1879, Swiftrunner was brought to the gallows after a large breakfast. He danced and laughed, offered to end himself if someone gave him a tomahawk, and after a small lunch of pemmican and a slight delay due to the executioner, he was finally dropped. The ordeal was over. But that isn't the full story. The January 4th, 1901 Calgary Herald reprinted the whole Swiftrunner story, with a very odd header. The following journalistic lie appeared in the Chicago Times sometime in December 1879. The author of this wonderful piece must certainly be an imaginative genius, worthy to rank with Baron Munchausen. The author of that preamble is right. There are a lot of inconsistencies with the story. Swiftrunner wasn't the loner the Northwest Mounted Police made him out to be. According to the Calgary Herald on July 31st, 1954, Swiftrunner showed up to St. Albert in the spring of 1879. When asked by a priest where his family was, he said that they had starved during the winter, and he himself barely made it through. The priest mentioned that Swiftrunner didn't look like a crazed man who just ate his family, and knowing these missionaries, they would have seen their handful of crazy folks. Swiftrunner's request to take some kids on a hunting trip did arouse suspicions, so an inspector went to his property and interviewed him. He told the priest that they ate the teepee first before resorting to any humans. Yet when the inspector showed up, an undamaged teepee was set up in the camp. Swiftrunner admitted to the policeman that some survival cannibalism took place after his family died of natural causes. So what's the truth? What is this thing? The Wendigo, the Witigo, however you spell it or say it, it is a true horror story. On one hand, it's a frost giant cryptid of folklore, but on the other, it's a hex cast upon an unsuspecting person. It could even be societally impressed upon a person. Maybe Swiftrunner was just a violent alcoholic. But since he was familiar with the Wendigo myth and condition, maybe he relaxed and let himself fall into the horrid state. There are many cases before and after of Wendigos like this. Seemingly rational, healthy individuals that are either cast out or told they are Wendigo, or convinced themselves they are one. The part I find the scariest is the witch trial nature of the whole thing. At any moment, if you have a dream and let someone know, you could be banished, bound, tortured, or even executed, as long as you live in a society that believes strongly in this cryptid. Wendigo sightings would slowly decrease as the 20th century marched forward. By World War I, they were nearly extinct. Swiftrunner's tale would get a rejuvenated boost when an author, Leslie Chivers, made up a story about the Wendigo of Fort Kent. The story spread and was reposted online as if it were true. It doesn't help that Leslie has since deleted his post about making up the story. The admission is only available on his archived site. To this day, the fake Fort Kent Wendigo story is spread around, diluting the real tales of disease that go unresearched. Society may have outgrown the Wendigo, but when the winter is extra cold and food is hard to come by, you never know when that icy dream will crop up again. Thanks for watching.